In this video, I'm going to speak with you about main effects. Main effects are part of that 2x2 factorial design that we've been talking about. So it's sometimes easier to look at a specific example. So this is a 2x2 design. There are two levels of one variable and two levels of the other variable. Let's talk about each. So factor A, which is the row variable, is anxiety. And we have two different levels for anxiety, low and high. So people they filled out some sort of a survey and they were classified as either being low anxiety or high anxiety, depending on their self-report measure. So anxiety is our A factor. It's the factor that goes across the rows, and it has two levels, low and high. Then we also have another factor called camera recording. And camera recording has two levels, no camera or camera. So in this particular situation, job applicants were applying for a job and they were scored on their performance in the interview. That's the dependent variable. Some of the applicants had a camera recording them and some of the applicants did not have a camera recording them. So the factor B factor has also two levels, no camera and camera. So let's just review. Factor A is anxiety with two levels, low and high. Factor B is camera recording with two levels, no camera and camera. And the dependent variable is how well they did in the job interview on some sort of a measure. So what a 2x2 design gives us then is four different cells or four different groups of people. So the first cell is going to be the mean score for applicants who have low anxiety but no camera during the interview. We call this the A1B1 cell. So low anxiety, no camera, and we'll put the mean scores in that cell for that particular group of people. The next group of people represent anybody who had low anxiety but did have a camera recording them. So their scores are plotted in this next box. So this is called the A1B2 box. All right, so let's take a look at the A2B1 box. These are people with high anxiety, but they were not recorded with a camera. And the means of their scores would be put in this box. And finally, the last box is called the A2B2 box. And that is for people who self-report to have high anxiety and they were also recorded during the interview. So as I look at this particular study, what are some hypotheses that you might have? Well, you might have a hypothesis that people with high anxiety do worse than people with low anxiety. Or you might also have a hypothesis that people who are on camera do worse than people who aren't on camera, or vice versa. So we can make our hypotheses based on these two different, what we're going to call main effects. So a 2x2 design, we can do three different types of analyses. We can look at the scores as they differ by anxiety level. We can look at the scores as they differ by camera. In other words, did the camera have an impact on the scores? And the first one would be, did anxiety have an impact on the scores? But there's another thing that we can do with a 2x2 design, and that's look at the scores by anxiety and camera together. We're going to talk more about that in the next video. In this video, we're going to talk about the main effects of anxiety and camera. So each factor that we just talked about, anxiety and camera, has a main effect. And these are the mean differences among the levels of each factor. So we can have a main effect for factor A, anxiety. We can have a main effect for factor B, camera. Those are basically two different tests that we're doing. So this is an example of what it would look like in a matrix. So let's just orient ourselves to what's here. So we have all the different cells that we talked about, but instead of having the description of the participants, this time I have the mean scores for those participants. So people with low anxiety who had no camera had a mean score of 9. People with low anxiety who had the camera had a mean score of 7. Oh, that means that it went down a little bit, didn't it? People with high anxiety and the camera had a mean of 5, and high anxiety with no camera, mean of 5, high anxiety with the camera, a mean of 3. All right, so we have these numbers in the cells, And what we can do is find out if there's a difference between scores based on low and high anxiety. So how do we do that? Well, basically, we're going to take the mean of 9 and the mean of 7 here, and we're going to come up with the average performance for low camera. And the average performance on a job interview for low anxiety, not low camera, is 8. So that is the average. The average for high anxiety, we just take the two cells together, we average them out, we end up with our high anxiety score of 4. So we had, if you have low anxiety, you scored a 8. If you had high anxiety, you scored a 4. Do we have what's called a main effect here? Well, we don't know if it's significant, but it looks like we do have a main effect, meaning there's a difference between these two means. There's some sort of effect of anxiety on interview performance. So there does seem to be a main effect for anxiety. So let's take a look at main effect for camera. No camera, the mean is 7, and having a camera, the mean is 5. So here it looks again like there is a main effect for camera, meaning camera does affect your performance in the job interview because the mean of 7 is different from the mean of 5. Now, whether that's statistically significant, we don't know yet. But we say that there's a main effect here. So we have a main effect for anxiety. Anxiety impacts job performance or interview performance. And we have a main effect for camera. Having a camera affects your interview performance. So what we have here is what we call a main effect for A and a main effect for B. All right, let's try another one. Let's say that the means are a little bit different. And what we're going to do when we analyze our main effects is we're going to start with the A factor, the rows, and we just draw across these means on the ends. And this time we have a mean of 6 for low anxiety and a mean of 6 for high anxiety. So in this case, we would say there is not a main effect for anxiety on interview performance. So it's not there. There's not a difference, in other words. Let's see if there's a main effect for factor B, camera. So no camera, the scores were 7, and having a camera, the scores are 5. So you can see right there, we do have a main effect. Now, whether it's statistically significant, we'll talk later. But right now, we say there seems to be a main effect for camera. In other words, camera seems to impact someone's ability to do well in a job interview. Okay, so just to sum up, we have no main effect for A, and we have a main effect for B. All right. We're going to try one more. This time for anxiety, we have the means in the middle, but then we have the averages on the ends. So if you had low anxiety, your mean was 6. If you had high anxiety, your mean was 4 on the interview score. So here we say there is a main effect for anxiety. Anxiety in this case does seem to have a main effect. Let's look for the main effect of factor B, camera. So we have a mean of 5 for no camera, and we have a mean of 5 for camera. So in this case, we say that we have no main effect for factor B. So when you're doing a 2x2 factorial design, sometimes you have a main effect A and B, sometimes it's just A, sometimes it's just B. In this case, we had a main effect for A, but no main effect for B. In the next video, we're going to talk about the most exciting part of the factorial design, which are interactions.